Welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. This episode is brought to you by Harrys.com, and we've a really great holiday offer from them coming up for you later in the show. Now, if you're new to us, you may not know that we produce a number of other history-related podcasts as well. Angus, the other half at the History Network here, does his own podcast dedicated to World War II. Angus continues to produce 2 episodes monthly, and it's an eclectic mix of Second World War related topics. MacArthur was a notable episode, and his recent episode on the PBY Catalina flying boat is proving a popular one too, where Angus actually talks to a guy who owns a share in one and flies it. We also produce the podcast for Ancient Warfare magazine, so if ancient warfare is your thing, then why not have a listen along to that? And if wargaming is your thing, then we produce the Wargaming Soldiers and Strategy podcast, and in the latest episode, out Monday 3rd of October, the guys are looking at all things terrain. So you've plenty to keep your ears busy there, and all you need to do is head to www.thehistorynetwork.org and use the links there to access all these great podcasts. Incidentally, we've a nice big shiny donate button on the homepage at the site, and if you feel the urge, we would certainly welcome that most gratefully. Or if you want a bit more listening bang for your buck, then in the store at the website you can find our past seasons all packaged up as chaptered files for download. These seasons vary from between around 2.5 hours to over 5 hours, and they are just £2 each. Thanks for your continued support. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 21, Episode 11, Financing War. This subject was suggested quite some time ago by a listener, more along the lines of what does war cost was the question, and it's rather difficult to come up with any kind of figure that approaches accuracy on that one. So I've decided instead to look at a more general view of how wars are financed. Essentially, there are 3 main ways in which finances can be raised with which to use for war: taxation, raising debt, or simply printing and creating new money. The Romans, among others of course, took a taxation route. It was from around 100 BCE that Roman legions divided into 10 cohorts of around 400-500 men each. That's 4,000 to 5,000 men in a legion. Let's assume it was the upper 5,000 figure, as there were also some legions with 5,500 men, so we'll average at 5,000. In 167 BCE there were 8 of these legions, but by 50 BCE this had almost doubled to 15, a total of around 75,000 men. And it was around 20 years later that Augustus created, for the first time, a permanent and fully professional army with a central command and logistics structure, resulting in a permanent force of 300,000 men, which then paved the way for the huge armies of later centuries, when there were 25 to 30 legions across the empire. Obviously, this all needed paying for, so in around 6 CE the emperor also created a treasury specifically for the military, Aurarium Militari, which was funded by taxes and allowed for a system of retirement benefits. Now, historians have very differing views about what this cost was, but I pick a ballpark figure somewhere in the middle, and it would equate to around £22,000, that's pounds in weight, of gold, some 352,000 ounces of the yellow stuff, which at today's prices is somewhere around $415 million. Oh, I should mention, that was the annual cost, by the way. Governments, of course, throughout history have needed to borrow money to fight wars. Traditionally, they dealt with a small group of rich financiers or even individuals such as Jakob Fugger or Nathan Rothschild, but eventually wars and their cost grew too big for such funding. Governments then have 2 choices. I say 2 choices because I'm discounting direct taxation for war or military effort in the modern day, as it's simply too contentious most of the time. That being said, obviously some of the taxes we pay go towards our respective governments, Ministry of Defences, etc. So those two choices are a type of war bond or simply printing new money. An early use of the term war bond was for the $11 million raised by the US Congress in an act of 14th of March 1812 to fund the War of 1812, but this was not aimed at the general public. So let's take a look at how World War I was financed. Austria-Hungary implemented a war finance policy modelled upon that of Germany, and in November 1914 the first funded loan was issued. As in Germany, the Austro-Hungarian loans were issued at half-yearly intervals every November and May. The first Austrian bonds paid 5% interest and had a 5-year term. The smallest bond denomination available was 100 kronen. After the war, Hungary issued loans separately from Austria in the form of stocks that permitted the subscriber to demand repayment after a year's notice. Subscriptions to the first Austrian and the first Hungarian bond issues amounted to a total the equivalent of $675 million. It seems incredible, but the Austrian government also wanted to tap into the financial resources of its nation's children, so they released a child bond, which was openly promoted through campaigns in schools. The initiative was immensely successful, eliciting funds and encouraging loyalty to the state in its future Austro-Hungarian youth. Over 13 million kronen was collected in the first 3 child bond issues. Canada released its own so-called victory bonds after 1917, with the first issue being quickly oversubscribed and raising $398 million, or about $50 per capita. The second and third victory bonds were floated in 1918 and 1919, bringing another $1.34 billion. The government awarded communities who bought large amounts of bonds victory loan honour flags. Germany's access to the world's financial markets was somewhat problematic at this time, and as such she was largely limited to domestic borrowing, which was induced by a series of war credit bills passing the Reichstag. Though these took many forms, the most publicised was the public war bond Kriegensleihe drives. 9 of these bond drives were conducted over the length of the war, and, as in Austria-Hungary, the loans were issued at 6-month intervals. Patriotism played a strong part in these bond drives and proved extremely successful, raising approximately 10 billion marks in funds. This success only covered 2/3 of war-related expenditures, however, and of course the interest payable on the bonds represented a growing expense, which required further resources to pay it. The United Kingdom launched its bonds with similar patriotic messages and pressure. The British sovereign will win. Invest in the war loan today, being a typical example of the advertising at the time. But compared to France, the British government relied more on short-term financing in the form of treasury bills and exchequer bonds during World War I. Treasury bills provided the bulk of British government funds in 1916 and were available for terms of 3, 6, 9 and 12 months at an interest rate of 5%. However, the British government also printed some fresh banknotes under the Currency and Banknotes Act, which saw Britain leave the gold standard. The government issued £300 million of paper banknotes, equivalent to £30 billion today, without the backing of gold, with which the financial obligations could be repaid. Through interest-bearing war loans, the British government raised around £2.5 billion of new money throughout World War I, but not without criticism. Labour politician Tom Johnston would later write of the 1917 war loan in particular, No foreign conqueror could have devised a more complete robbery and enslavement of the British nation. On the 30th of June 1932, Neville Chamberlain announced that the government would exercise its right to call in the 5% war loan, offering a choice of taking cash or continuing the loan at 3.5%. Although they were obliged to give 90 days' notice of such change, a 1% tax-free cash bonus was offered to holders who acted by the 31st of July. This conversion saved the government about £23 million net per year, and it was only in December 2014 that the UK government announced it would redeem the outstanding war loans on the 9th of March 2015, thus ending a cost which had spanned around 3 generations. In 1917-1918, the United States government issued Liberty Bonds to raise money for its involvement in World War I. According to the Massachusetts Historical Society, because the First World War cost the federal government more than $30 billion, by way of comparison, total federal expenditures in 1913 were only $970 million, these programs became vital as a way to raise funds. Through the selling of Liberty Bonds, the government raised $21.5 billion for the war effort. The majority of sales were not to individuals, but banks and financial groups that ignored the patriotic appeal and bought the bonds principally as an investment opportunity. The bond campaigns themselves proved relatively ineffective at gaining widespread public support. World War II, although with some different approaches here and there, was funded in much the same way as its predecessor. And we'll carry on with that in just a moment, after I tell you about a great holiday offer from our sponsors of this episode, Harry's. It's that time of year when for many the thought of getting presents fills our minds, and if you're anything like me, it's not so much the buying of the gifts which is the stress. In fact, buying the gifts is the easy part and the fun part. It's actually thinking what to buy. So Harry's have made that part really easy for you by giving you an amazing offer which allows you to get a gift that's not only thoughtful but also completely practical. I've personally been using Harry's shave products for a few years now, and they're real quality products. I really like the way the razor feels in my hand. It sits just right for me. You know there's going to be no slipping, and the blades and lube strip mean I get a precise quality shave every time. You know it's really worth thinking about at this time of year, using Harry's to create that special gift for someone. Harry's limited edition shave set makes such a great gift. Not only is it a beautiful unwrapping experience for the recipient, but it's such a practical gift too. You can even personalise it with Harry's engraving service. You know, if you haven't heard of them before, Harry's was started by two best friends, Jeff and Andy, who were fed up of being overcharged for razors. So they started their own razor company to give people what they felt they deserved, a great shave at a fair price. And this holiday, they want you, our listeners, to get this fantastic holiday offer. Just check this out. Harry's is offering a limited edition shaving set. Midnight blue chrome razor handle, which you can get engraved with initials. 3 of Harry's German-engineered 5-blade cartridges that provide a close, comfortable shave. Foaming shave gel that smells amazing. Beautifully designed gift box. And this goes for $30 on harrys.com. They also offer handles and sets starting at just $10 if you haven't tried Harry's for yourself before. And as a special offer for fans of this show, we've partnered with Harry's to give you $5 off your order when you enter code HISTORY at checkout. Free shipping ends on December the 9th, so act now. Go to harrys.com right now to get a limited edition holiday shave set while supplies last, and remember to enter the promo code HISTORY at checkout for $5 off. That's harrys.com, promo code HISTORY for your $5 off this great holiday gift set. Thanks so much. All this raising of finance goes towards paying for everything needed in war. Equipment in war is very expensive. You need large numbers of guns, ammunition, tanks, aircraft, ships, uniforms, food, supplies, etc. A lot of this equipment gets damaged or lost to the enemy, sometimes in staggeringly large numbers. When you think of it, say an M1 carbine, the most used gun by the US forces during World War II, cost about $45 a piece at the time. Doesn't sound so much really, but then 140,000 of them were made for World War II alone. That suddenly ramps up to over $6.5 million worth. That's just one gun, one ally, and doesn't include any ammunition. When you take the ante up a notch to tanks, aircraft and military shipping, the numbers might not be as great in quantity, but the costs of these items are so large that the overall costs of conflict soon ramp up to dizzying amounts. For example, in World War II, aircraft carriers would be anywhere from around $500 million to $1.5 billion each in today's money. The British lost 10 of them and the US 14, including seaplane tenders as well. Total military shipping losses for the British were over 1,000 units, and for the US about half that. And all these equipment costs are needed at the time of war itself, yet the obligation on the money raised for paying for all of it can continue for generations. In more recent times, the United States federal government has spent or obligated itself to a total of around $4 trillion on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Among other things, this figure includes interest payments on direct war borrowing, foreign assistance spending, and estimated future obligations for veterans' care. Note, future obligations. All that finance has been almost entirely raised by borrowing. This borrowing has raised the US budget deficit, increased the national debt, and had other macroeconomic effects, such as raising consumer interest rates. It is estimated that unless the US government can immediately repay the money borrowed for these wars, the future interest payments could total over $7.9 trillion by 2053, effectively meaning that the cost of the war simply continues forever, unless it gets written off. There are other types of war too, which are far more difficult to give an actual number in terms of cost to. Take the war on terror. Afghanistan and Iraq are an obvious part of that, but a name given for the various conflicts, defences, systems, protocols, laws, etc. that go on around that don't have the luxury of the more clearly defined lines, such as the two world wars. The war on terror isn't a totally physical war, and its lines of conflict are blurred. Its expenses and need for finance to fund it can be justified innumerable ways, and perhaps with a slightly pessimistic view that a general war on terror could go on indefinitely, then so could the expenses and need for finance of such war. Unsurprisingly, US government figures and figures of those who question the efficacy of such a war on terror differ wildly. They range from around $1 trillion to around $6 trillion total costs so far, with interest perhaps being as high as $1 trillion. And if you can't at least pay the interest, then of course the debt and cost will keep rising. Wars then, whichever type of war they are, cost a great deal of money, and in their own way also generate a great deal of money too, by taxation, less so in the modern era, by bonds and by money printing. They, in a sense, add to the economy as well as taking from it. Justification for the enormous costs of wars and conflict in older times was a message delivered as one of direct patriotism and allegiance to the nation. In more recent times, the justification perhaps takes a slightly less direct patriotic approach by appealing to our need and right for the security of our borders and our own safety from the enemy. The directly patriotic approach of World War I served well to raise the necessary finance to fund the war. Quoting this April 1916 advertisement for the British government's 5% exchequer bonds, which was typical of the time. Lend your money to your country. The soldier does not grudge offering his life to his country. He offers it freely, for his life may be the price of victory. But victory cannot be won without money, as well as men, and your money is needed. Unlike the soldier, the investor runs no risk. If you invest in exchequer bonds, your money, capital and interest alike is secured on the Consolidated Fund of the United Kingdom, the premier security of the world. Well, there we have it, the end of Season 21, and it leaves me only to say thank you for joining myself and Angus over the preceding months. We will be back in the new year with Season 22, and of course, if you'd like to have a go at writing a script for us, or want to drop us some suggestions for subjects you'd like to see us cover, then just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org for all of that. Thanks once again for listening. You've been listening to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast, researched and read by Nick Barker.